Well, I think that it's one thing for somebody to have a very personal response to their own experience, and I don't think anybody is kind of trying to attack Chrissie for her views. But what I do think is really important is that the way she characterised them in the interview was really to expand and extrapolate and to talk about rape victims in general. And I think it's just very important that those kinds of ideas that suggest that there is something that women and girls can do to somehow prevent rape play into myths within our society that lead to us kind of blaming the victim, focusing on victims, and really are actually completely erroneous. I mean, I think the main thing to say here is that there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that there is anything women and girls can do to protect themselves, because actually 80 to 90% of victims of rape are raped in their own homes by an acquaintance, by a parent, by somebody they're in a relationship with. So the idea that you can wear the wrong thing or act in a sort of sexy way and it sort of somehow causes someone to rape you really suggests that rape is about sex and attraction, when in reality we know that it's a crime of power and control. And so it's really, I think, quite wrong to focus on victims, and of course plays into a society where we know that only 85% of victims never come forward and report their rapes. So we do have a big problem, and it does matter when we talk about these things. It has an impact. There will be people out there listening. We know that this particularly happens with children.
Right.
In fact,
Let me bring in Claire
blame
Fox
themselves.
here. Do you take this point that Laura Bates is making, that people will take the wrong message effectively from what she said?
Well, I don't think that society should be run by what somebody else decides is the right message, and nobody's allowed to say anything but the right message. I mean, that was what horrified me about this, which was Chrissie Hynde does an interview, talks about something that's happened in which she both discusses how she thinks she should have taken more responsibility for her actions, says some things more generally about a horrible thing that happened to her when she was young, and she was turned into a victim. And then the whole of social media goes mad and accuses her of victim blaming, which with no sense of irony whatsoever, by the way, that this occurs. And apparently she didn't follow the right script. She didn't say the right things. And I thought that was a very unhelpful intervention, because I actually think when it comes to issues around sexual violence and rape, we need to be able to talk about these things, to be open and to be honest as women, as men, as society, and to discuss them. I think that there are things that she said that I disagreed with, but there are things that she said that you can see in a common sense way make sense.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. I mean, Laura Bates, you are too young to have teenage children, but can you imagine if you did, and they are going out in quite a short skirt, and perhaps, let's assume they're overage and they're drinking or in danger of drinking, would you say something to them? Would you say, it's not advisable to wear that short skirt?
Well, I'm not suggesting that parents in general on a much wider basis shouldn't talk to their children of any gender about safety risks. What I'm saying is that in this case, that would be completely erroneous. As I've just mentioned, there is no demonstrable link between what a woman is wearing and the fact that she's
wearing.
To
follow that argument,
all
it shouldn't matter if a teenage girl or a young girl or any woman goes out in a short skirt and
Absolutely. It shouldn't matter if a young woman goes out in a short skirt, because
that's an ideal world.
Women are
raped
wearing burqas. We know that women of 90 are raped in their own homes and that babies are raped. It's absolutely not the case.
There is no link.
There is no link.
There is no link.
But
Claire Fox.
But one of the things that's happened in this discussion is that actually in a broader discussion about rape culture, we're told that all sorts of aspects of everything from kind of the behaviour of laddish behaviour in rugby clubs on universities to the sexualisation of images in adverts leads to rape culture, leads to rape. So as it happens, there's a broader discussion that goes on that suggests that rape and sexual violence is a threat to young women everywhere. And yet in this instance, in a situation where somebody says, I think that possibly getting completely off your face and out of it, hanging around with motorcycle gangs and basically being which is what she said, was inadvisable, it seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable thing for her to say. It seems a perfectly reasonable thing to be able to say that if we say that men have to take responsibility if they got absolutely off their heads, and then say, well, I raped her, it's not my fault, what do you expect? That we also say to young women, and we say to ourselves, and we take responsibility for our own action, which is if we get off our heads and we can't take responsibility for our actions, we actually have to take responsibility for them. We can't just simply act as fragile victims of men all the time. That seems to me to be a major defeat for women.
Laura Bates, that is what she's saying. She's making this point. I mean, she had been taking Quaaludes, and she says you have to take responsibility. If you play with fire, you get burnt.
Well, I think it's really important to say as well that, so first of all, again, I would say that there is no factual evidence to support the fact that there is anything women can do to avoid rape. In fact, the one
you
thing
didn't
that...
answer my question earlier there. I mean, and this I'm curious about. If you had a teenage daughter and she was going out in a miniskirt, would you say wear something longer?
No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. Because first of all, there is no evidence to suggest that her wearing a miniskirt would in any way provoke rape, but also because I think it's very important, and this is important, when we have these discussions, when we talk about these things, the reason why we need to talk about these things and we need to raise this issue is that when somebody says, as many people have, this is not the first person, this is, a long line of high-profile people who've said girls should be taking responsibility, don't get raped. We add to the idea in our society that rape is a kind of shadowy thing waiting to befall women
Laura,
and girls.
no,
that
we
it
should
is
talk
their
about
Fox,
it.
I'm
We
sorry.
can't talk about it.
Claire
Shame
Fox.
people who do.
And I think it's
Claire
really
Fox,
important
Laura
that people
Bates.
are listening to this at home and they need to know if
Well,
you're
the debate
raped,
is going
isn't
on
your
here and it will
responsibility.
continue, but not now. Laura Bates, Claire Fox, thank you.
It seems a long way from the catwalk, but in recent years, the bulk of Australia's saltwater crocodile farms have been bought up by the fashion industry.
OK, so there was no fraud in the 2010 South African World Cup?